Okay, everybody, welcome to part 3 of our liquid techniques tutorial. So the third one is going to be the most technically complicated out of what we've done so far. So I want you to bear with me, but what I want you to understand about our third composition is that this sort of animation or motion design is sort of a basis for a lot of motion design that you see. So we're going to be working with, a liquid pouring in to part of the screen and then filling up a shape. But this is sort of the nuts and bolts or skeletal framework for a lot of different types of motion design that you see. So this should give you a good foundation in how to move things across the screen and make things look, sorry about that, look as though they appear like they jump from one thing to the next on the screen and things like that. So let's go ahead and do a new composition. I'm going to do 1920 by 1080 on this like I've done in the previous. And I'm going to go ahead and do a solid. I'm going to go with maybe more of a light pink. And again, I've said this before, but you can do obviously whatever colors you want to do, but you can also alter what you're doing however you like, just as long as you're showing me that you've completed the technique. It should look different than mine. It should be done in your own way. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this solid because this is my background color and I don't really want it moving around. The next thing that we are going to do, so I'm gonna move through this, and I'm gonna probably be repeating myself a little bit, and that is because this one's a little bit more technically complicated. But so it's always hitting that middle ground between people that want things to be repeated, several times because maybe they're a little bit newer to the software, and then those of you that maybe have some experience outside of these classes with the software, where you're like, I don't need that repeated, but I want you to understand from my perspective as an instructor that I need to be able to accommodate both types of learning. So for those of you that don't want me hear the repeating, I'm sorry. And for those of you that need the repeating, I'm here for you. I got you. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to create a new shape layer. This first thing that we're going to do is going to be the liquid pouring from the top of the frame. We're not going to really give it a source. We could give it a source, like maybe it's coming out of a pitcher of iced tea or something like that, but we're going to keep it simple, like I said, for the sake of time, because this tutorial could become very, very long, and I don't want that to be the case because we've already, we're already an hour in. So anyway, let's go ahead and do a shape layer. I'm going to have you grab the pen tool up here, and I'm going to back out a little bit because I want the beginning of this to go off the frame a bit. So I'm going to lay my first anchor point kind of right around here, and then I want it to land about 2/3 down on the screen. So I'm going to click down and then I'm going to pull so that I get a nice smooth curve there. And while you have this pulled down, if you hold your shift key down, it will actually put it at that completely vertical angle if that's, if perfection is what you're going for, which we certainly are not in this particular tutorial. Okay. So by the way, another way that you can move your screen around, you can zoom in and out with Command plus minus or Command or Control, and then you can also move it around here, or you can scroll in and out. But another way that you can move the screen around is if you hit your space bar, you're going to see this handy hand pop up, and you can use that handy hand to pull your canvas around. It's actually not working because when things get totally out of control, you can always come down here to your lower left-hand side and just hit fit, and it'll pop your canvas back into where it's fitting the window. But if you hold the space bar down, you've got this hand, and you can kind of move things around like this. So this is it's a handy hand. It's a handy dandy hand. All right, so for this, I don't want any fill. If I click on the color itself, it's not going to do anything for me to get rid of that. So what I need to do is click on the word fill itself, and then I need to click no fill here. I do want a stroke, however, and I'm going to make the stroke be dark blue so it's nice and contrasted with that light pink background. Go for that color. Hit OK. So the first thing that we're going to do with the stroke is I'm going to actually make it fairly thick. This is going to be our water popping down into the screen and filling up a shape eventually, but we're going to work on the water pouring in, or the liquid pouring in first. Okay, so I'm going to go up and just hit my selection tool because I don't need my pen tool anymore. On the shape layer itself, we are going to add an animation capability here, and we are going to add trim paths. Trim paths is a really powerful tool. It gets used a lot for various reasons. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to shape this the way that we need it to be shaped, so that it looks like a big drop of water or liquid coming out of the screen, basically. So we're actually not going to use trim paths yet. I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. The first thing we're going to do is we are going to manipulate the shape of this path. So if we go to stroke 1, we can manipulate the shape here. The first thing we're going to do is under line cap, instead of a butt cap, we're going to choose a round cap. We want that to be round because that's the beginning of our water coming down. I still think this could be a little bit wider, so I'm going to come up to my stroke and I'm going to make it a little wider, like so. The next thing that we need to do is under taper, we are going to taper the end. It seems like it should be the width that we're manipulating, but it's actually the length for some reason. So that's the wrong side. That's the end of it. So I want to taper the top of it so that it's more like a drop of water, like so. So that's a good shape. Looking good. So now that we have the shape, we're going to go ahead and animate the trim paths. And at the beginning, we want it to not really be seen on the screen at all. So how do we animate that? Sometimes I just have to play around with these. And it's going to be this one right here. So we're going to have the end be 0. I'm going to drop a keyframe. And I want it to be 0 for a couple of frames. So I'm going to drop another keyframe down the path a little bit. And then I'm going to come in and maybe move all the way down like so to just about 1 second. Again, this is a 3-second timeline that we have. And I want that drop of water to hit. And then I actually want to animate the start because we need to have it disappear into the shape. So we need this movement to follow up. So I'm going to have that, I'm just going to kind of look at the animation here. So I'm going to have the end of that be at 0 until maybe about right before the animation for the beginning of the path. Well, I guess they're calling it the end on here, but right before this hits its last motion frame, I'm going to have the tail start coming inward behind it. So I'm going to hit a keyframe here because I want it to be at 0. I want the tail to be sitting exactly here at this particular frame. I'm going to drag that forward. And then I'm going to animate that tail falling into where the shape of water will eventually be. So let's take a look at that. Now, if yours doesn't look exactly like this and it's looking a little bit funky and you are like, I don't know, because you're learning a lot about keyframes and trimming paths, don't stress about that. It doesn't need to be perfect. So that looks like a pretty good drop of water. I'm really liking that. That looks good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to put an effect on this to give it sort of a wiggly appearance. So if I go to, now let me see, my effects aren't quite showing up, and that's okay because we always like to review So we're gonna go to Window, and Effects and Presets is not open for some reason. So if we type in Roughen Edges, this is the effect that we're gonna use on this particular shape. So I'm gonna take that and just drop it on the shape layer. And you're gonna see that it's got this more rough edge. And you can play around with everything here. It doesn't have any motion inherently. We have to give it what are called evolutions, but it actually just looks pretty good by default the way it is. Let's see what happens if we bring the scale up. The scale up actually doesn't help us, so I'm going to Command Z that. It's actually looking pretty good the way it is. You can play around with these. Again, I don't want to make the tutorial longer. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and animate some evolutions here. So I'm going to toggle the clock on here at 0, and then we're going to move it forward until about the end of this water coming in, right about here. And I'm going to pop in like the number 3 here, and it's going to animate evolutions, which is the edges, the roughness of the edges kind of animating a little bit. And let's just see how that looks. So yeah, that looks pretty good. Pretty convincing drop of water coming in. Very cool. Okay. Excuse me. Let's see. So the next thing we need to do is we are going to create a shape layer that is the water itself, and then we'll create the mask for the water. So what we need to do is go to Layer, New Shape Layer. Now it's easy to forget to create a new shape layer. You need to do that for every new shape because it's kind of confusing, but on a shape layer you can actually create multiple shapes, but you can't animate them independently. So the other good thing to do is to actually name your layers what they are. So this is, we'll call this the droplet. And then this layer is going to be the water. All right. So on this layer, we are going to just choose the rectangle tool, and I'm going to back out a little bit here. And we'll move it down here in a minute, but for now, we'll just create a rectangle that kind of covers the space of where the water will go. We do not want this to have a stroke necessarily. But what I am going to do is I'm going to copy this color code in case I need it to create the fill, because I don't know what the default fill is going to be. So you can always grab your color code from here. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit the word stroke and say no stroke. OK. I'm going to go into fill. And yeah, so the color in the fill is on the default color from before. So I'm going to go ahead and paste my color code in here, and it's going to pop me right into that blue that I need. And hit OK. So wonderful. That's looking good. And I'm going to come back over to my selection tool because I'm kind of done with that. We're going to apply an effect on this layer. And I'm actually going to just take my effects and presets panel and I'm going to pull it over here because it keeps getting buried, which I could go through and close panels, I suppose, but I don't know. I'll just leave it. So the effect that we're looking for here is wave warp. And let me just zoom in on this a little bit so that when I apply that, you can see it. So I'm going to take wave warp and I'm going to apply it to water. Now, I always click and drag my effects down, and you don't have to do it that way. You can actually just double click on the effect and it'll apply it to whatever layer is selected over here. But the problem that I have with that is that I will often have the wrong layer selected when I go to my effects, and then I apply the effect to the wrong layer. So the reason I drag and drop them, it's the long way and it's the harder way, but it's just a habit that I have. So that I know that I'm applying it to the wrong layer. So FYI, if you're like, why does she drag it? That's why, but you know, it doesn't have to be done that way. All right, so what's cool about this is that we have our waves already animated when you choose the wave warp. So that's super cool. I'm gonna make some adjustments here. These waves are not super believable to me. They need to be a little bit wider. So I'm gonna go to wave width and I'm gonna make them a little wider, so they're a little bit more believable. And I'm fine with the speed at which they're animated, but understand you can come in here and you can play around with all these settings, okay? There's all kinds of different things that you can do. I'm gonna try something really quick. I wanna look and see if turbulent displace will also make this layer do a few more things, but I'm not sure how that's gonna look because I've never actually used the wave warp and the turbulent. So turbulent displace doesn't do anything by default, but what I like that it's already doing is you see how it's randomizing these waves a little bit and it's making them a little bit less static. So what we can do is we can animate the amount of turbulence. So let's see, do we have evolutions here? Let's see what the evolutions look like. Yeah, so I think this is going to give a little bit more kick to the liquid animation, so let's go ahead and do it. So we're going to start off at the beginning, and I'm going to toggle on the evolutions for turbulent displace. Again, there's a lot of controls here that you can play around with. But I'm just interested in giving a little extra movement to the wave warp because it feels a little static at default. And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to say like 5 is probably a little too much. I'm just going to do like 3 evolutions. And then let's see how that's moving this water over time. Oh yeah, that's giving a really nice liquid fill. That looks really cool. So great. So that's kind of what our water movement is going to look like. And then this is going to fill the liquid shape that we're going to create here in just a moment. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger because I'm going to create an ellipse here and we're going to create a layer mask for that. So if I go in, well, before I do this is the problem. I always create duplicate shapes on the same layer, and it's a bad habit. But we need to go to new shape layer again, and we're going to rename this. I'm just going to call this circle mask, and we're going to go ahead and create a nice ellipse on here. I'm going to hold my shift key down so it's nice and proportionate. So there we go. And I'm just going to really center that. It's a little bit too big. I'm just going to center that in the middle of the screen. And I'm going to kind of look and see how my water droplet is looking. So it comes down. Perfect. So now what we're going to do is turn this into a mask. And this is where we're going to go to the track matte again. And I think what we need to do is bring the water to the top. I always do this incorrectly in tutorials. I swear so I think what we need to do is choose the mask for water. So let's see if I'm doing this right. I did it right. Look at that. So you need your water layer on top, the circle mask underneath, and then on the water, you need to select the track matte as the circle that's underneath it. And let's look at our liquid. Oh, that's nice bouncy water. I like what I'm seeing. So now all we need to do is animate the position of this water coming up as the droplet hits into the circle. So we're going to go ahead and bring it down. And I'm just going to hit a keyframe here. And then here comes our droplet. And what I want it to do is, like, as soon as the droplet kind of hits right there, the water needs to start coming up in a believable way. And I think I might need to move. I think this droplet might need to move down a little bit so that it's really hitting the bottom of the circle. And you'll know what I mean once you start tinkering around with it. So let's see. So if we move this down just a little bit more, really hitting the bottom of the circle. And then we bring the water up like so. And the little bit of the droplet is sticking out underneath. So I'm just going to bring the droplet up. Now this is going to be happening really fast. And so your viewer's not necessarily going to see all the nuance of like frame by frame the water droplet hitting. But it's definitely off. So like the way that it is now, the water is starting to come up a little too early. So what I need to do is have this water set at 0 until I'm really ready for it to come up. So I'm going to delete this position keyframe because I don't want it coming up at all until the water droplet's like right there. It should be coming up. So I'm going to drop a keyframe for this position to stay the same, and then I'm going to start bringing it up. And I'm going to bring it up really quickly because I'm creating a visual transition between this water droplet coming down and this water coming up. So let's see how that's looking. That looks pretty good, actually. That looks fairly convincing where the beginning of that is going. So I'm actually going to drag this forward, this position keyframe, but I'm going to change the end position to fill up the entire shape. Now, this is a lot of keyframes and a lot of details to follow. So if your animation isn't quite, you know, the same, or it doesn't look as smooth, please, you know, just move on. We're just going through a technique. It doesn't have to be perfect because I don't want you pulling your hair out and getting too frustrated. Now, really, let's see, that water droplet, it's not really believable in terms of like that water filling the entire circle. One thing that I probably need to do is I need to edit the path. Let's see if I can edit this. I need to edit this anchor point and stretch it to be a little bigger. And then this path could probably be a little bit thicker to be more convincing of an amount of water that could fill that hole. And then, so me making that bigger, it's dropped my droplet down underneath the bottom of the circle. So I'm going to go ahead and just move the whole layer up again so that that's convincing. But I think that the size of the water's a little more convincing for filling up that circle. Okay, so cool. That is liquid fill at its base. That's how you do that. And so now what we're going to do is we're just going to create a couple of other little animations just to make this motion look really cool and kind of button it up with maybe a logo or a phrase that you want your viewer to see. So let's go forward to about here. We're going to create a new shape layer, and this is going to be another ellipse. So I'm just going to hold the shift key down and drag. And this, we'll change the centering of that in just a second. I don't want to have a fill on this. And I want the stroke to just be white. Easy peasy. Now the stroke is really big right now, so we're going to take that down and we're going to actually make it pretty thin. And then the other thing, the shape layer, I created it in the center, so I want to pull that up to the top. And then I'm going to just drag that so it's nice and center. And I may just make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to hold my shift key down so it's proportionate. And then I'm going to do a nice trim path on the circle here just to further add to this motion. So we've got major motion going on. We fill that up. And then I want this white circle to sort of come in and animate around, and then I'm going to bring in some text. So let's see. What we need to do here on this shape layer is we're going to add the trim paths capability once again. And under trim paths, we're just going to, let's see, which way do we want to animate it? I want to animate it the other way, so I'm going to have to animate the end. So there we go. Because I want the circle to, I want it to start here and then wrap around. So that's actually the opposite of what I want to do. Maybe it's the start. Okay, so we're going to start it at 100% so you don't see anything. And then over a fairly short amount of time, we're going to go ahead and toggle this and slide it back down to 0 so that our animation comes in, so the water fills up, the line comes in, and then I'm going to actually drag this keyframe, whoops, I'm going to drag this keyframe out a little bit and make it be a little slower. And then at the very end, we're about 2/3 way right here. The very end, I'm going to go ahead and grab the text tool. And we're just going to create, you can say whatever you want here. I'm going to put in the word drip. And then I'm going to change the text color to white. And we're going to bring that scale down. And we'll go ahead and just leave it that font for the sake of time. And I would like to pull this out a little more. Okay. So now we've got drip. One thing that we need to do on this text layer is move this anchor point. It's kind of hanging out at the bottom. We want this anchor point to be sitting in the center. And we're going to just do a little animation with this. So on the transform panel, we're going to go ahead on scale. We're going to drop a keyframe. We're actually going to take the scale down to 0. Okay? And then we're going to bring it up a little bit, just a few frames. And then go ahead and bring that scale up to something that's oversized, like so. We're going to move forward a few more keyframes. And then we're going to bring it back down to something that fits, or maybe a little too small. And so what we want to do is we're kind of creating like a bouncing effect where the text comes in and then it's like bouncing a little bit. And this kind of mimics like, you know, the water pouring in, right? It's a very fluid feeling sort of animation. So there we go. So let's see what this looks like. And it looks okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit my space bar and let it play. It looks okay, but we're going to do a few things with the keyframes just to make that animation a little bit smoother. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the keyframe here, and we're going to use something called the Keyframe Assistant, which is a really, really awesome tool. We'll get more into it, but I just wanted to introduce it. So if you control click on the keyframe itself, you go to Keyframe Assistant, we're going to choose first Easy Ease In because this is the first keyframe in the sequence. And you're going to, it's hard to see right away, but it actually creates more of a bounciness. It eases in the animation a little bit better so it doesn't feel so static. We're going to go to the last keyframe and we're going to say Easy Ease Out so that it kind of bounces it out. And then the 3 keyframes in the center, we're going to control click. And we're going to choose just Easy Ease, which is going to bounce those around. And what you can kind of imagine this like is like when we're doing animation paths and it's got a hard angle on it, and we come in with that, with this tool here, the Convert Vertex tool, and we make it smooth and rounded. That's kind of what is going on with the easing in and easing out, is we're kind of making a rounded path for these keyframes instead of being it super sharp. So I'm going to introduce a tool, and this is the Graph Editor tool, I believe. It's something, if it's not exactly that, it's something close. So you can further smooth out your keyframes. You have the keyframe assistant, but you can actually come over here and you can hit this. It is the graph editor. You can hit this button right here, and that's going to show you what your keyframes are doing. So before we did the ease in and the ease out, these were more like straight lines with hard angles. But you can actually come in here and further adjust those to make them really, really bouncy. So I had the 3 keyframes selected before I came in here. So that's why those were all lit up, but you can move these around independently. Whoops. And, you know, just like any other path tool, except this is the animation, you can go in and adjust these and make them, you know, you can adjust them so that the animation becomes very, very, very bouncy. This, I could come in and do this. And if we come back over here and hit the graph editor again, you'll return to the normal screen. But what you'll notice, hopefully, is that the drip coming in and out of scale is really bouncy now. So let's take a look at the whole animation. See how it's, the bounciness of it coming in and out is intensified quite a bit. So the graph editor is a really handy tool for taking the keyframe assistant tools and just exaggerating them and finessing them a little bit more. Really, really useful. You'll probably find that you're going to use that a lot as you continue to build up an advanced skill set. Okay, so let me just run through this again. Looks pretty cool. So we're going to go ahead and go to composition. We're going to add this to the render queue. I'm going to leave my settings as is. I'm going to call this drip. And I'm going to go ahead and render this out to the desktop. And so the next video is very, very short. It's just going to go over stitching these videos together in Premiere for those of you that need it. Some of you do not need the overview, but some of you do, which is perfectly fine. So the last thing I'm going to do is go ahead and save. I'm not clicked on After Effects. I'm going to go ahead and save my project, and then you can go ahead and close this. And so what you should have are the 3 rendered videos that we've done. We're going to stitch those together in the next video. Okay, see you in a minute for those of you that need it. All right, bye.